All right, everyone, welcome to the Sprint 25 demo. Let's get started. Next slide. Today we got a bit to go over. I'll start with the Sprint statistics, then we'll go to Greg on providers, another Greg on automate, user interface with Dan. I'll talk about some gem extraction work and some of the destabilizing changes and the progress we're making there. Next slide, please. This last sprint was a lot of activity, 152 pull requests merged. You can see a good chunk of them were bugs and enhancements. And you see at the bottom there we have some Rails 4 and Ruby 2.2 PRs that came in, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. Next slide, please. Over to Greg.
Which one?
All right. So this sprint, as Jason was pointing out, we had a lot of destabilizing things going on. So we didn't have a lot of stuff going on in the provider space, but we did manage to get the Kubernetes event support in, which I think was really a good addition to what we're doing on the container side. That's thanks to the container integration team led by Itamar. And Jason also added 2 new Amazon instance types. One of them is the M4 instance, which is Amazon's new general purpose instance type. I think that's replacing one of the old general purpose instance types. And then a new large version of the T2 instance type, which is their burstable performance instance. There were also a lot of bug fixes on the provider side, but as I was pointing out, we've kind of held back waiting for the Rails 4 upgrade as that got underway. So on to Greg McCullough.
All right. So for automate, simple change, but we enabled the automate role by default. So when you bring up a new appliance, you don't have to go to configuration and enable that. It's used for so many things now, and it's becoming more and more important right out of the box. So we wanted to get that set. And then the other thing we got merged, and I'll show a demo here, is service dialogues. We've had dynamic dialogues that when you want to update them, we had a refresh button, which is not really the best way to do it. So we enabled the auto refresh, which any field when it changes, either typing in a text box, changing drop down, selecting radio buttons, you can trigger other dynamic fields to update. And since we didn't want every field to have to update if it didn't need to, or the dynamic fields, you can define which ones will respond to those triggers coming from other fields. So I want to run through a quick demo of that. Share my screen. All right. So I'll talk through this. So this is the dialog I set up. Run through the different fields. This one you see down in the options. It has auto refresh when modified. So it's jumping around a bit. It will trigger a refresh when it changes. This one is just a plain drop down that will get refreshed. Sorry, it's a dynamic drop down. Will get refreshed. This is normal text box that doesn't do anything. And then a zip code one, which will trigger other fields to refresh. And finally, the summary, which honors the trigger and will update and show things on the screen. So stop here real quick. This is a little method I put together for the summary screen. It basically takes the zip code value, and as long as there's 5 digits in there, it makes a quick call and will return a formatted address showing that. Otherwise, it takes the other fields that are on that dialog, and the very bottom of that just sets the value to the different fields on the screen. Let's see, I might have paused that too long, but in a second. So as that's running and those triggers hit, you'll see the summary screen get updated. All right, so this is the dialog running. The first, I'll show the values here. These get refreshed when any of the other triggers run. So this one, we'll change them to from 1 ABC to 2 XY, and then the summary screen also gets updated. This text field doesn't have any trigger, so nothing happens when you type in it, but the zip code does. So once I put a value in here, go through, run the method, update the, and it also, since the summary screen pulls in the no refresh value you see, once you put in the zip code, that value comes into play there. So change it to another location I once lived in. There we go. And then again, just kind of clearing this out. And I wanted to see who had zip code 1234. And it's Schenectady, so who knows? Nice. So again, so this field, if I change this field, it doesn't update, it doesn't have the trigger set, so the summary doesn't get modified. So I'm going to jump back to the dialog, modify that one field, and tell it to auto refresh other fields when it gets modified. And I'll jump back to here. Now you see, once that changes now, that's causing the summary to get modified again. And if you change the upper one, the refresh gets modified and also causes the summary to pull in all the right values. So, and that is it. Okay. On to the next slide. Do I have to stop sharing? No.
Are you guys seeing my screen yet? Because I'm sharing it now, but I'm not hearing Dan.
We see your screen, but we don't see,
but you're not on the
slide. You got to switch to the slide.
I'm not on the user interface one?
You're not on the slides.
You're showing the Firefox browser.
Showing the blue jeans. You're showing the blue jeans tab.
All right. Let's try that again. That's the problem.
There we go.
Sorry.
Well, there we go.
Now you got it.
All right, Dan, over to you.
Now it's my turn. Okay. So in the user interface area, obviously from the third bullet, you can see we spent a lot of time cleaning up UI bugs, but also got started on researching controls to replace the DHLMX controls that we're currently using. They're currently GPL licensed. We want to try to get to something more with a better open source licensing, and most of what we're doing is probably going to go towards whatever Patternfly is doing, Bootstrap and Patternfly, but there may be some exceptions to that. We're finding that so far it seems like about 90% of the stuff we can do with the Bootstrap Patternfly controls. And then also along the way we upgraded to jQuery 191 because we were able to. Next slide. We added some new donut charts. Those were available in the charting library that we're using, and we'll make sure that they're available in any upcoming libraries we decide to use. So those are up on ManageIQ. Next slide. And one kind of weirdness that was happening was when we're trying to make the UI more responsive, and when the charts got resized, you can see on the left there, things got scrambled. So that got taken care of. And that's it. Next slide, somebody else.
Rails 4.2 and Ruby 2.2 were merged into Sprint, and obviously that's a huge milestone accomplishment. There's issues here and there. I know they're being worked on as they come up. I'm working on one with serialization. LJ, I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
Yeah, I believe there are some outstanding user interface issues, and as we find bugs, we're trying to fix them. So I guess as we have any that are discovered. If you report them, we can verify that they're either fixed or not. And it's mostly on the Rails side. There have been a few warnings on the Ruby 2.2 side, but primarily we've been seeing them in the Rails side.
Cool. I know Aaron did a ton of work on it. I don't know if he's on, if he wants to say anything about it. Or Matthew. Sorry to put you guys on the spot. Okay.
Guess not. I just want to add one thing about Ruby 2.2. We haven't enforced Ruby 2.2 yet. We're still on, you can still use Ruby 2.0 and up. The appliances are being shipped with Ruby 2.2, I believe. And I don't see us really bumping the version until we have a feature that's 2.2 only.
Gotcha.
Or even 2.1 only. We'll bump the minimum at that point. But we'll see. Next slide. Okay. All right. So Oleg and I have been working on extracting all of the C code out of the lib directory into external gems. Part of the reason is because when we want, for reorganization purposes, we're trying to move the lib directory out or away, and those pieces are getting in the way. So MIQ large file Linux, which gives access through the file class to files that are larger than 4 gigs on 32-bit Linux. We moved that piece out into a gem. We debated actually throwing it away because we don't really run on a 32-bit Linux appliance, so it kind of doesn't get exercised. But we're keeping it in place just in case in the future we need it for some kind of future smart proxy or some other kind of host that we may have to create for a 32-bit Linux. MIQ block DevOps actually was doing multiple things. It has some block device calls, low-level block device calls that it was doing, but in addition it was doing string allocation with alignment of the string buffer. So we kind of split that into 2 separate gems, Linux block device, which just does the block device piece, and memory buffer being the other gem. And you know, we really didn't debate about whether or not we want to use existing gems much. We're trying to just moving it out, and then we'll make that decision later. So if FFI is the right way to go for memory buffer, then we can do that in the future. But we didn't want to make that decision right now. We just want to get it out. And the last one, which isn't C code, but we had a module called MIQ memory, which was there to create buffers for some of the fleecing stack in a kind of efficient way. So if you wanted to create, you know, like 100 megs of memory real quick, or a buffer of size of 100 meg, you could do that. That's pure Ruby code, but it made sense to go into the memory buffer gem, so we just moved it over there while we were at it. And then the last one is NMA core. It's still to do. We were hoping to get it in this sprint, but it didn't happen. That's moving into a NetApp manageability gem. Ultimately, we'll probably throw that gem away because NetApp actually provides their own Ruby layer, but we didn't want to invest the time to try to get that working right now when all we're trying to do is get this C code out. So that one will hopefully come in the next sprint. Next slide. Can everyone see that? Okay. So I just want to talk about some of the upcoming destabilizing changes. I think we touched on them last sprint report. So I just want to give some progress where we're at. On the Rails 4 side, as you heard, it was merged. For this coming sprint, we're going to continue to stabilize around Rails 4 problems. If you see problems that look like they're Rails 4 related, please report them.
To the authorities.
To the authorities.
Proper authorities.
After the last C file, the NMA core is extracted, we're going to move the lib directory at the root into VMDB gems pending. The reason we're putting it there is because ultimately everything in lib will probably become a gem, and there'll be very little left in the end. But the effort involved in actually making those into gems is kind of high, and we want to get this rerouting process in place. So we're going to move it to gems pending, And then eventually gems can be extracted from pending and live in VMDB gems directly. And we can keep them in the same repo, but still actually push out new gems to rubygems.org. Ultimately, once those gems stabilize, and we find we're not making changes to them, we can move them out into their own repos if need be. Part of the reason to keep them in there might be to do similar to what Rails does. They keep active record and active support all in the same repo, because typically when you're changing one, you're probably changing something else in the product, and having two separate repos for that can be kind of a hassle. So this keeps them in the same place. So things like the pluggable providers, they may actually just live in the repo. Coming up, build and system are being extracted to a ManageIQ appliance repo, or perhaps two separate repos. I know LJ has started work on that, and that will be coming soon. And then ultimately, after all those are done, we've talked about it a few times, we want to reroute VMDB to be the new root, so the application looks like a Rails app from the root. That's it. Next slide. And that's it. You can see the upcoming sprints. And are there any questions? Just reading the look back. All right, I think that's it. Thanks, everybody, and looking forward to the next sprint. Bye.
See you guys.
Hey.